we're just so honored to have Zhou Tian with us, who's a professor of composition at Michigan State University, a Grammy-nominated award-winning composer, who's writing just fantastic stuff. And Zhou, we've had a lot of very established composers, and I just thought it would be really important in our last weeks here to have people more at the beginning of their career. Last couple weeks ago, we had Joseph Schwantner here, for instance, and people like that. And I just thought it would be a wonderful idea to do this. We kind of do this in three parts. The first thing that we're going to kind of talk about together is your life in music. You know, if you chose music or if music chose you, and I think your story is particularly interesting and will be interesting to the students because they've been to China, and your journey, which has been quite interesting just to read on paper. I can't wait to hear the twists and the turns. And in addition to all your successes, if you feel comfortable, we love to hear about failure too. What's been interesting is the number of composers that have talked to us about how, sure, you know, I won the Pulitzer Prize, but 30 years ago I was doing this. One of the people who spoke, for instance, was Marty O'Donnell, a college friend of mine, who wrote all of the music for the Halo and Destiny video games. And before he did that, you know, and he wrote Destiny with Paul McCartney, 25 years ago, he was writing commercials for kitty litter in Chicago. So we'd like to hear about that, because I think students right now are graduating into a world that's very, very uncertain. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you, and certainly I, have experienced our share of disappointments and doors shut in our face. And we love to hear that stuff, just to know that perseverance gets us through. So that's kind of the first part. The second part, we want to talk about the music, of course, and your process. And as you know, because you read that article, we're engaged here in a group composition process, and it's been very interesting. And the results that these students have come up with are astounding. I'll try to send you some clips. You won't believe it. They've just been really creative, both with the compositional strands as well as the software. They've become very, very facile with the software. It's some of them interesting how they're making all that work. And I specifically want to hear, I love that interview on your website about Transcend. And about the children and that all that whole interaction. That's a fantastic story. I just love that. So if you take it away, tell us a little bit about you and growing up in China and where music led you, and how all that worked.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's such a privilege, and thanks again for taking Petals Fire to China. I believe you did the Chinese premiere, the Asia premiere of the work. And I heard clips of it. It's just really wonderful. So it's a really privilege and honor for me to be here today. I grew up in '81 in China, which was a very different China back then, and even more drastically different from the China in the 70s and the 60s, because right around 79, the China opened up to become sort of the China we know today. But at the beginning, it's still quite, closed up, because after decades of closing down, I mean, no Western music was allowed, So in the early 80s, when I was born, finally you could walk on the street carrying an album of Rolling Stone and a score of Writer's Brain without getting into trouble. That was the first time in decades you could actually do that. And people actually went back to the music school to have the professional training. So that was the sort of the backdrop of the culture when I was born. So and my dad was one of those young men at the time who went into the music school as soon as the country opened up. And he learned all these Western composition skills and techniques. He went into the commercial music world, which didn't exist before, which means you use synthesizers to do TV shows and commercials and variety shows and movies. It was really the first wave of technological, using technology to make music rather than, hire an orchestra to do it. In China, that was the beginning at the 80s. So my dad, he he was a composer, so he writes for all those commercialized programs. And so I grew up with this kind of 2-track system. One track is I still went through this quite strict sort of classical training as a pianist first, so do my Brahms and Beethoven and Bach. But the second track is really more interesting and way more, I think, changed me a lot more deep down, especially looking back today, is that during the weekends, I would go to my dad's studio and just play whatever the show needed. So, which means 99% of the time it's non-classical music.
Right.
So if the show needed little jazz tune at the beginning, I would do it, because my dad, he's not a pianist. Violin was his instrument. I'm the only one in the family actually play a keyboard. So he had all these ideas, but he couldn't, do it in real time or with a click track, on the keyboard. This is where I come in. I become the keyboardist in the studio. So I became quite good at it. So without the score, he just some lead sheet, just some, chord symbols, and we just go and just, and a lot of folk singers coming. So I grew up with this kind of really happy music making environment where I never even knew a great line of, this is classical and this is non-classical. It wasn't that clear to me. At the beginning, I sort of, I remember my sort of interest in composition came from 2 places. Number one was I was asked to do a little arrangement of a Chinese folk song for this sort of new cartoonish TV show. And I just did it on piano, and then, track by track a little bit. You have to look at that little 8-inch, two color, like a mono color synthesizer thing all night, do it track by track. And then I did a little 30-second thing, and I felt like, okay, this actually, I feel like this is a great interest. I wanted to do it. The other thing was I was playing piano at the level, and then it became quite difficult repertoire. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes, I just like anybody, I didn't want to practice. So there were some passages, for example, in a Debussy or Chopin, that I would change the music in a way that my piano teacher wouldn't notice. I kind of recompose it, but it's in the original sense of the work. Sure. So it's not like changing notes, just simplify in a way. Now I call it tastefully, rearrange it. So I could actually get away with it a little bit, Yeah. And that really gave me a great interest of, maybe I could sort of write a little Debussy piece on my own, So just those bits and pieces at the beginning.
How old were you when this started? How old were you?
This is teenager, 12, 13, 14. I started piano in Chinese standard quite late, very late, at 8. So that's really late. Yeah. I started studying violin first with my dad. So that was my first instrument, but that failed completely because he's the opposite of, the tiger mom, tiger father, because maybe he's in a commercial music where he doesn't believe in any of that stuff. So if he was my teacher and he was my violin teacher, I just never practiced. Right. So that just didn't work. So he did the next thing. He sent me to his friend who was a pianist. So I started piano at 8. So it's really about, the concept of play, I kind of played the music growing up. And later, I was lucky to get into the middle school, high school division of the Shanghai Conservatory, where it was only there did I start to seriously learn the music theory. Because I always thought I learned a lot of music backwards, because a lot of people know, that's a triad, that's a major chord, that's a minor 7 chord, and then they go compose. I'm completely the opposite. I already knew all the chords, what sounds good, what sounded good, how to combine them. but I didn't know any of the music theory. I didn't know that's a minor seven. I didn't know like a 5/7 go to one that sounds good. I just know it sounds good. I didn't know the theoretical part of it.
Right.
It was only in Shanghai Conservatory that I know, oh, that's a minor seven. That's why it sounds so cool every time you have that thing. And the inversions, I didn't know all the, figure eights, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So looking back as a composer, I really think that freedom, that sense of not knowing theory, but just know everything, learn by sound, by
Right.
ear,
Right.
that really influenced me even to today. Even today, I mean, I don't have a system of writing. I don't have I don't even have a really concrete plan of an entire piece before writing the first note, because I know even if I had a plan, I mean, the plan will change.
Sure.
I just always go by sound. I only have one goal, is that the stuff that I write that needs to sound good to me. Basically, that's the guidance.
Your story is so similar to several of the composers that we've talked about, in the respect that you talk about playing the piano, and if you couldn't quite work something technically out, you sort of recomposed it. I mean, Joseph Schwantner basically said the same exact thing about playing the guitar, that he would play a piece, but he liked to embellish it and change it and modify it. Cindy McTee said the same thing. I mean, it's fascinating to me that it's kind of the rebellious youth part of it,
Yeah.
you're just going to make something new because the discipline of it you were interested in. At a certain point, it feels like for you folks, the discipline starts to tamp down the creative part, and you just can't take it anymore, and the creative part sort of takes over. That's what's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's neat. Yeah, cool.
The,
So
the
you
wrong
did
notes. Yeah,
you're
it
in
was the
Shanghai.
wrong notes. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. At the wrong notes that led to creation, basically. Even today, I was thinking, for example, I'm having this and I play something wrong. It was, oh, that sounds better. So you write the other version down. Yeah.
So you're in the Shanghai Conservatory, and then you decide, I'm very interested in this part, to go to America. What was happening there?
Yeah, well, honestly, at the time, going abroad was a big trend, because the time, this was, I went into Shanghai Conservatory 95. So I graduated high school there, 2001. So around 2000, late 90s, it's a huge thing to go abroad to study. And in top music schools in China, and I can tell you, my class had about 23 people, and at the height of sort of this trend, 17 went away. So
Wow.
went abroad.
Yes.
So it wasn't it might seem to the outside of the school, oh, it's a big deal. But at in my class at the conservatory, it wasn't. And it's a question of where you want to go.
Right.
So majority of students went to America, and East Coast and West Coast and all that. So I sent out a bunch of applications, all in the U.S. Basically, all the names I knew, and I got really lucky. Curtis invited me for a interview, so I came here for an interview and talked to the faculty. I still remember the entrance exam. It wasn't an exam because Curtis was so small. I mean, they have like 3 composition teachers, 4 composition students in the entire school.
Right.
So it basically is like a coffee shop one-on-one thing.
Right.
But I remember went to Richard Daniel's house, and he, on his coffee table, it was like full of scores, all open in the middle, like somewhere in the middle. So you don't see the title, you don't know who wrote them. And he was just like casually pick up one and say, well, who do you think wrote this?
Wow.
Of course, I've never, I mean, it was high school.
Right.
I had no idea. And he was like, I know it's like, this is not supposed to be like, you're not supposed to know everything, but just look at the notes, just tell me, your best guess who'd write this. And I remember I guessed Tchaikovsky was a serenade Um, and I guess right for that one. And I remember he was like, "Oh, okay, that was very, that was good." But the rest of it, I just didn't know. I didn't know Mahler Symphony. I didn't know Rachmaninoff Symphony. Um, but I remember that moment. That was a little kind of test for
Scary.
that kind
Yeah.
of yeah.
Wow. So you studied there with him, and Jennifer Higdon was there at the
Yeah,
time?
with Higdon most of the time.
Yes.
Most of the time I was with Jennifer Higdon, who was one of the most supportive, sweetest person ever. And to this day, she's a big supporter and great colleague.
Right.
Yeah, and so the experience at Curtis is that I now know very very different from a majority of the schools out there because it's so small. Because so they were. I mean, the good and bad. I mean, the good thing is you're giving so many opportunities like the orchestra base. If you only have 4 composition majors in the school, every year the orchestra will put on a concert for you and
Right.
with your works.
Right.
So that is really the most, that is till this day I think the best master class is
Right.
basically have a really good orchestra play your work. Like the first rehearsal, that's the master class. That's the best composition master class because
And
immediately you just know
yes.
what works, what didn't.
Right. I was going to say that that feedback is so critical.
Yeah.
That's worth like 2 years of composition lessons probably.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just so that's why now that I'm as a composition teacher, I do everything in my power to just get students just don't let the music store in your hard drive and in your drawer. Just let people play, let people play, let people play, because you really learn the best and fastest that way.
So what did you, now this is just the way life works. So earlier today, I had my cohort with my graduate students, and we're doing repertoire this year. And today's class was devoted to Jennifer Higdon,
Mm.
believe it or not. And one of the grad students who's on this call, Chris Mathical, who's my TA, he did a presentation about her. So it's very fresh in our minds. Tell me, what did you learn from her? What, like technically, or what was her criticisms of you initially, and how did she help guide you and shape you?
Yeah, well, she is basically a great uh, thinker about the method I was just talking about. She believes you can only do theory to a degree,
Yeah.
especially for large ensemble work. You just gotta go out there and then sort of use almost the failure
Yes.
to learn. And then with large ensemble, it's because it's just such a long process, such a complicated process, um, uh, from writing music to orchestrating to engraving to making the parts to rehearsal techniques to how to talk to musicians, conductors. I mean, that whole series of process, you just need to do it over and over again to be better. I remember she told me like sort of just this concept and of learning by doing. So just do it over and over again. And each week we kind of aim the lesson always, the destination is there's going to be a rehearsal.
Right.
So you just aim, so every piece will be performed. It was never a an instant that we wrote something and it was like, okay, let's go to the next one. No, it was every piece, even how matter no matter how small, it was always get played. And she's there. She was there for the rehearsal and for the performance. I think that is super super important.
So,
Um,
so what's, I think young people today, maybe all composers, maybe younger composers especially, they think, well, I have Sibelius and I have Finale, so I can write it and I can hear it. So why do I need an orchestra to let me know what's good or bad? So what's the critical difference in the process for you as a composer in terms of your growth, comparing the audio digital to the real orchestra?
right. Well, if you only use the sort of the computer uh, sample library, this computer sound, if you aim that as your orchestra, you're basically utilize, I would say, like 30%
Yeah.
of an orchestra.
Yeah.
Um, and it's very easy to become or to get into this trap of becoming a MIDI composer. And there are many, I mean, there are great MIDI composers out there. But soon enough, you find out you basically it's all very rhythmic music. It's all very, kind of energetic music, but it misses the other 70%, the warmth, the romanticism, the what people think the sort of the heart of classical music, a lot of that warmth and lyricism, because the strings just sounds terrible in the
Yeah.
computer. And if you're only writing using the computer sound, you're just gonna avoid writing those most beautiful sounds. You're just gonna write all percussion and all, and that, nothing wrong with that, but what a shame, right? To
Right.
sort of ignore the other 70% of capability and colors of the orchestra.
Boy, I love what you're saying here, and I love the way you said it. The fact that they're becoming MIDI composers.
Yeah, there
That's
are
that's a
many.
category. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
an actual category,
Mm-hmm.
and that really keeps them from becoming all that they could be creatively.
Right.
True.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the guidance would be um, look at the works now and in the past, and then find out those sounds that you cannot kind of recreate in the computer and actually write for those, because
Right.
those are the actual sound that the actual human being can do.
Right.
um, and don't basically just don't think the don't aim your piece to be MIDI only, because that and if you turn the table, um, and I can tell you the musicians who are playing your music know immediately whether you were writing for them or you were writing for the computer,
Sure.
because the musicians play, especially pros, I mean, they play so many pieces, they just know, oh, this guy is basically writing for the computers. There's nothing I can do here. It's all like accuracy and stuff, and then the time. There's nothing singing or anything. They can tell. They can tell immediately. So it's not only you're not utilizing 70% for your players, they're not also getting the full experience of your work.
Yeah, you
And
said
I think
something.
audience knows it too.
Yeah, I think you said something there in passing that's really super important. So, and what I'm trying to do is extrapolate what you're saying and string it together. So, writing to MIDI makes you a MIDI composer, and one of the things you're going to miss is line in music. Am I right about that? Is that what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying?
Yeah.
Sort of narrative sense in the music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. I think we're surrounded by that today. It's
Yes.
sad. Yeah.
Well, because I think compositionally speaking, um, computer compress the time. It just compresses time. When you see the screen, it encourages you to write sort of compressed music, energetic music, and if you buy into that, if it becomes a habit, you just keep doing that, and you lose the beauty of time.
Right.
But when you look at some Prokofiev, some Shostakovich, some Mahler, some Strauss, or some Beethoven, or John Williams, um, you notice, oh, they have the luxury of time in their music. It just goes, and that becomes something you miss when you're working purely digitally, because it encourages you to do it note by note. So
Mm.
it blurs the sense of time. But for instance, if you're still using the computer, it's fine. I mean, I use computer as well. But if you just imagine the next 20 seconds of music on piano first, or whatever the music you play, you control that time, then you put that music into the computer. You use the best of both worlds. That's great.
Oh, I love
but
that.
just don't in the computer trying, because all the notation programs, and I have like so many discussion about programs, and even with the designers of some of those programs, it's because they were designed first as engraving tools.
Right.
It's supposed to, you have something and you put this into the computer. It was not supposed to be you have nothing and you just go to the next note. It becomes a very passive way of working.
Boy, that's
So
brilliant. That's
yeah,
brilliant, Joe. That's brilliant. And so I think the theme that's coming through here is the imagination part. The imagination is cut off
yes,
because it's been delegated to a machine, more or less, in a note
right.
to note kind of construct. I get it. Wow. That's really great.
Yeah, I mean, if I may add one more thing, is a simple concept of, to me, composition should be sound. You hear the sound first, and then you put the notes into the computer or you write it down, whatever. But music first, sound first. But the computer forces you to click the notes first, then you hear the playback. That's completely backwards.
Right.
And so that's the part that's not very intuitive. So even if you use computer, I'm not against computer, I think it's great. Just have a keyboard or have something so you can hear whatever exactly, and for 5 seconds or 10 seconds of music before you click those notes. I think that will solve this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, I'm building on what you're saying. Tamping down intuition kills creativity. That's kind of what you're saying,
Yep.
or certainly dampens it. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Wow. So let's go back to your teachers again. I know you studied with Christopher Rouse, God
Mm-hmm.
bless his soul. Tell us about that.
Well, he was so after Curtis, I got lucky again. I went to Juilliard, and Rouse was my teacher, and he was in a way very different from Higdon, um, and he is like this Wikipedia, like almost, because he knows every single piece in the history. I mean, just ridiculous. Um, so with him, he focuses actually less on the techniques and more about broader sense of originality,
Yeah.
broader sense of who you are. I remember I had a one conversation with him, because he kept saying at some parts of my music, he pushed me, could you be more you and more this and less of that, and I got a little impatient. So one lesson, I literally went in, opened up my score. I'm like, Miss Ross, can you tell me like which part of the score is me and which part of it is not me? And he was very patient. Actually went through it. And he was like, those three measures, that's more Zhou Tian here, and that's a little bit too Strauss, and this is whatever, da da da. And he was absolutely right.
Wow.
And then after that, I noticed, oh, okay. So let's say in that piece, that was 30% of me, and 70% is all influences, which is completely normal. Now I know, for young composers, and nothing
Sure.
wrong with that. You should
Sure.
go through that period. Nobody is original at first. Nobody in the history.
Right.
So all you need to do is identify which part is you, and through time, gradually you expand that 30% into 90%, and then
Right.
that's you. And you cannot do this overnight. He told me that. And he even showed me his early pieces. He told me, this was not me. This was me. It was just so, I mean, eye-opening, because very often I heard this from the students, that they said the teacher kept pushing them to be more original, but they have no idea what to do.
What that means. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
that means. Do I write stuff that I don't even like to be original? Because
Right.
that's really, honestly, at least half the students face that question, or have faced that kind of confusion. They feel like it's almost, I have to write something I don't like in order to be new, and
Right.
that's not the case.
Right.
It's a gradual thing. You should write something you like all the time, even though what you like is a little bit of John Williams, a little bit of Kelly, a little bit of Maggie. That's fine,
Right.
but it's gradually expand that 15%, 30%, a little bit more and more.
Right.
And I think when Rouse put it this way, I understood. I never, after that, I never had that confusion again about, in terms of what the voice is about.
Right. Wow. So when did you well, first of all, how did you come to Michigan State then? You just saw the opening and applied and it sort of went.
Yeah, pretty
Wow.
much. Well, there was another life-changing experience. So I was teaching at Colgate University, a small liberal arts
Yeah.
university in
Yeah.
upstate New York, and my wife, she's a violinist,
Well, how
and
about that?
she got a job at Detroit Symphony Orchestra.
Oh,
So she got the job first. So she moved to Michigan, and for a year, I think, most of the year, we were doing this long distance thing,
oh, yeah.
and we were
Hard.
thinking, what to do, and really just by luck, I mean, this position popped out, and then I applied, and fortunately got it. So now we're all in Michigan.
Very
Basically,
fortunate.
that's really it.
Very fortunate. That's really great.
Yeah.
Really great. So when did you start to become interested in doing something for wind ensemble or wind band? When did you first bump into bands? Because you went to Curtis and then you went to Juilliard. That's not a very active band scene there at all. So tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah. So basically, since MSU in Michigan, because before, like you said, Curtis doesn't have a band thing, and Juilliard
They do sort
doesn't
of, yeah.
really, sort of doesn't really. And I went to USC for doctoral. USC does have
Oh, right.
a good band program, and to Kelly and a lot of people there. But I just never had the chance to write a piece really for the wind ensemble. It's I don't really know why. I mean, just it became. I was lucky enough in a little after I got into the doctoral program, I was able to basically write on people's requests for pieces. So it was never, I mean, no one asked me basically until Kevin Sadato. And Kevin Sadato during my MSU interview said, "You are a wind ensemble composer." I'm like, well, I've never
Good for
written
him.
one. I remember this clearly. We had some kind of lunch during the interview, and I'm like, "What?" And he was like, I can see in your pieces already." And at that, really, I knew it was a big world, a new world of wind ensemble, but I never written one, and I never was part of it before. This
Right.
was 2016, really recent.
Right.
And he said that to me, and he said, if you got this job, the first thing I'm going to do is commission you for wind ensemble work, because I know from your samples that you sent, you kind of already written one. I was like, okay, sure. And I got in, and he followed up, and that was Petals Fire. Really, that's how the piece started.
Yeah. That's so
And
funny on the interview. Wow.
yeah, and I can see, and now I can see why, because I had a piece, it's called Palace of Nine Perfections, and I kind of, it makes sense. I can see, like, the wind writing was sort of make sense enough for him to notice that. So and since then, it's a great opportunity. And after the CBNA National Conference, I love this new world. I must say, I really love it. The people are so supportive and so eager to have the conversation about the future of any new works. So I think that's really great.
What so this is a question, if you, and please just answer me, say I don't get it. What can a wind ensemble do that an orchestra can't do?
Wait, cannot or can?
Yeah, what can a wind ensemble do that an orchestra cannot do? What's the attraction there for a composer?
Well, I think it's the culture. It's really the culture. I mean, to begin with, the orchestra has this vast repertoire. They, in a way, they need to preserve and 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 renew. And the renew comes after the preserve. and and for the wind ensemble is the other way around. You know, you want you it's there's this great sense of enthusiasm towards new creations, and
Right.
it's this sense of unknown, really, this sense of, you know, um, this brave new world that anything can happen. And it did I mean, the style of people's writing uh, do change, you know. And you look at, you know, Persichetti, you look at, you know, uh, William Schumann, and you look at people today, it's already like a revolution, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
So it keeps changing, um, and I think that's really exciting and fresh. And I think, um, so the concert going experience, because of that, is very different, because you
Right.
don't know everything. I mean, there's impossible. You go to a wind ensemble, you kind of know every piece. I mean, it's very rarely do that happen, um, and that's great.
Right.
That's great. You know, so I think that sense of excitement, the sense of uh, renewal, you don't really get from an orchestra.
Right.
Another thing, um, I think I talked about this once in the CBDNA conference. It was, I after getting to the wind ensemble world, I thought, um, the wind ensemble world is symphony orchestra on diet, basically. is You just feel everything is moving faster,
Yes.
things are more agile.
Yeah.
You get things done much quickly. I remember Federal Pass of Fire, you know, inside in the piece, there's a lot of, you know, tuned gongs. In one rehearsal, I remember Kevin said, you know, we don't have those notes. I was like, okay, I kind of, sure. Because in the orchestra world, or in professional orchestra, that's it. That's the end of it.
Right.
And the next rehearsal, 2 days later, we got them, we bought them.
Right.
And it's just, I never experienced that, because in the orchestra, I know that's it. And it's gonna,
Right.
if they're gonna buy it, it's gonna be a union thing. It's gonna take forever.
Right.
Just, that's not gonna happen.
Right.
But in wind ensemble, things will happen. I also remember for the rehearsal, he just added like another rehearsal,
Yeah.
which at that point, it was unheard for me,
Right.
because the
Right.
symphony orchestra would never do that. It's just
They can't.
not gonna happen.
Too much money.
Yeah,
Too
yeah.
much money.
So it also has to do with the youth, I guess, because in the school, it's a youth. It's this energy. So I really love that. And
Yeah.
all those things, I think a symphony orchestra just simply cannot do.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about your composition process. And I thought a good way to do that might be to talk about the piece Transcend.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I sent the students like your website and all that sort of thing, but we're coming into finals. I don't know how much time they had, but tell them a little bit about the piece. And I'm very, very interested in the part that you talked about the children
Mm-hmm.
and the input they had, and specifically and especially the program notes. I happen to know that the Transcontinental Railroad was essentially built by Chinese, and I just thought that was a brilliant composition to go after. So tell us about that.
Right. Well, Transcend was first started with the Reno Philharmonic, Reno, Nevada, which was a big, you know, part of the Transcontinental Railroad, and they kind of wanted to do a piece that honored the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was last year, 2019. And the word got out, and long story short, at the end, we have 13 American Symphony Orchestras join forces together to commission and premiere this work. It became one of the biggest sort of consortium symphonic projects last year. And I was really lucky to be tapped to do that. And I
Right.
was there from the very beginning. And I must confess, even though, you know, I was born in China, I didn't really know too much about Transcontinental Railroad. So I immediately dived into this kind of big 1 year long research project. And I kind of traveled to the most major cities, San Francisco, Omaha, Reno, and other cities along the route of the Transcontinental Railroad, talk to people, and sort of gathering inspirations. And I can tell you that I never done so much research on a single piece.
Wow.
Because if I'm writing for violin concerto, you just sit in the room and write a violin concerto. But this piece is different. This piece has a real historic significance, and I felt absolutely necessary to actually go out there to do it. And the orchestra supported this as well. So I was able to not only talk to the local people, but also go to the consortium orchestras to get a feeling of who they are and the voices. And along the way, there are really awesome inspirations. When I was in Utah, in Salt Lake City, they organized this kind of meet the composer kind of meeting event, which is very typical when you have a guest composer in town. And some musicians come, some local school teachers came, and at the end of it, I kind of just blurted out that oh, if you have any ideas, you can ask for your students if they have any ideas for musical creation of this piece honoring Transcontinental Railroad, you can send it to me. Never expecting anything to be written back. But after I flew back to Michigan 2 days later, I got this email from this teacher from Highland Park in Salt Lake City. And she actually went back to the classroom the next day, asked her class, if you were creating a piece for Transcontinental Railroad, what would you write? And she gave me this long list of ideas. And some of them are expected, like simulating this kind of sort of train sounds and all that. But there are two ideas really jumped out. Number one was using sort of really peaceful sound to to reflect the peacefulness of the desert, and using really jagged sound or to do the train, which I thought that's a contrast. That's very nice, and I kind of completely line up what I think about the piece. So I started the piece that way. I started with really serene strings, and then gradually it go into this relentless pulsing music, which is kind of the building of the trains and in the railroad. And the other students said, how about using the orchestra to recreate this powerful sound of dynamite blasting through the tunnels? And it was like, whoa, that's from a fourth grader? That's awesome. So I had that in the piece. In the piece, many instances, especially in the first movement, I used percussion instruments and the whole orchestra to create this, from time to time, this interruption of music that's kind of like dynamite blasting through the tunnels. So those are really, you would never expect that, to happen, those inspirations. Another one was when I was in Omaha, Nebraska. I went to the local museum, and it was this docent, and who kind of was really kind to show me around. And he happened to be a 30-year railroad worker with Union Pacific. So he kind of casually told me when the two trains met, when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, when the two trains met in Utah, one of the first nationwide telegraphs was sent out, and it only has one word, and the word is done, D-O-N-E,
yes,
exclamation point. So immediately, as soon as he said that, I was like, okay, there's something here. I need to find out how should I get this idea into the piece. And I immediately realized that the telegraph is done by Morse code.
Right.
And as soon as I met him, I drove back to the hotel and got on the internet, find out what is the Morse code for the word done, D-O-N-E. And luckily that word is a really awesome rhythm. It's bop, 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 bop. I mean, once I heard that, I was like, yes, I have my third movement. Because I was afraid all the way in the car, what if this dumb Morse code is some dumb rhythm, kind of just static, and I'm screwed. I can't use that. But it's so lucky that the down rhythm is actually really musical.
Right.
So I use that for the entire motif as the motif for the entire third movement of the piece.
Right. It's so interesting. And children, here we go again. They're just so creative, and they're such a resource to us. They just come in with no filters. So everything is available to them. That's really great. Well, then, before we get to some of the student questions, so we're, as I mentioned, we're on this group composition thing. So we have a bunch of budding composers. That's what I've learned about my wind ensemble. They've done some astounding work. And so what kind of advice would you give to them? Obviously you can't hear that right here as we're talking, but what kind of advice would you give to them about your own process maybe, or how to kind of find their voice?
Yeah, I would think be very practical, which means hear your work played by real players as much as possible, almost to make it a rule that you will never write a piece and that piece only stays in the computer. Make a rule for yourself. If you write a piece, no matter how small, how long, how short, you're gonna hear the live version of it, because through that you really learn the most. In terms of finding your voice, know the history of music, know the great grandmasters of the 20th century.
Who would those be in your estimation?
Yeah, well, basically from Debussy to Ravel to Stravinsky to Bartok. I mean, just those four. I mean, orchestration, continuity of music. They offer so much. And then the sort of, don't forget, and a lot of people forget, unfortunately, the mid-century American composers.
Yes.
So don't just listen to Copland. Copland is great. I love Copland, and Bernstein is great. But there's Piston, Walter Piston. There's William Schumann. There's Vincent Persichetti. Those guys are really awesome. If you learn from them, you kind of get this a filtered technique, because they really learned from the best. They really learn from the European guys and Russian guys, and they kind of put the techniques and mixed with sort of this American voice. And I think that's great. That's I mean, I learned so much from those guys, and I think they should be featured a lot more in classrooms. Yeah. And at least that's what I'm doing in my classes. And in terms of feeling the music, I think it's like a muscle memory. It's a hearing. Hearing is like, music is art of hearing. So it's not visual art. Sometimes we get a piece of music, it looks way better than it sounds. And that's not the purpose of it, right. With the computer engraving programs, sometimes people just draw a lot of stuff on page because it looks better without really knowing what does it do to the sound. So don't overcomplicate, don't make like a graphic art like thing. It's not visual art. No one's gonna look at your score when they're listening to your music in the concert. Right. So sound first, that music dictates what you see on page. Of course, the score needs to be totally professional, but just don't make it like it's for the eyes only, Right. Then that's so important.
Right. One other just tiny follow-up question. So who do you admire that's writing music today? Who speaks to you at all in that way?
Well, many. From my teachers, Higdon, Rouse. Unfortunately, he passed away. Stephen Harkey, who I studied with at USC. Aaron Kernis.
Yes.
Um, I mean, it's a slightly biased for me because I studied with kind of this sort of mainstream American symphonists, and my music is kind of in that word as well. Um, uh, if you are in a different camp, that there are also great music being written. You know, Band on the Can. You know, all these other kind of more experimental guys and the minimalist guys. Just know it all. Know it all.
Right.
Even film music. I know film music. A lot of people are inspired by film music. There are great film music out there. So, um, and if whatever the sort of style you choose, really the key is to make it the best
Right.
that you can. And then if it is the best minimalist, it's great.
Right.
You know, it's all about, the sort of the fullest, the best version that you can do.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Boy, this has just been great. I want to give the students a chance to interact with you a little bit. So typically we kind of have them send questions to somebody who's moderating. One of the grad students is probably moderating. And so who's up? Is it Dan, Corey, Chris? Who's moderating?
It's me.
Oh, great. So do we have some questions, Dan?
Yes. Yeah, we have a couple questions. So Dr. Zhou, one question that came up was, what advice do you have for creating or thinking about writing line or narrative for a beginning composer?
Great question.
Narrative means like a storyline, or
Yes, or you mentioned earlier about how, like, writing on, using the computer software, you don't have the ability to see the full line or have the full breadth of a work. And so do you have some advice in how to create that as a beginning composer?
right. Simple. Play it or sing it. Don't, because again, in the computer it's so easy to it just dictates you to click on it. It just, if you do click by click, it just compresses the time, because it makes you ignore the time of music. It makes you either be hypersensitive about the rhythm or don't care about the rhythm at all. So to break that, just get a chunk of music, maybe even use pencil to write it down, and then just sing it, whatever the instrument you have. I play piano, so I just play piano without the screen in front of me for a little bit, just to get like 10 seconds of music, and then you put it into the computer little by little, like that, not the other way around. So in this way, you kind of pre-listen to your music already, instead of using the computer playback to say, okay, let's see what happens now. That's only a checking tool. That's not like supposed to tell you what your music should sound like. You should know your music, how your music sound like, before writing that note, So do a pre-listen. If you're a singer, I do this all the time. I just play on the piano and then sing the line that I want. It doesn't matter if it's a quartet or it's a symphonic piece. Symphonic piece or band piece doesn't mean it's like 32 different things at the same time. Most of music is three things: the foreground, middle ground, background. Three things. You could do this by using a keyboard with your voice, or whatever the instrument that you play. Just utilize your own instrument. Sort of play out your music. So you pre-listen to your piece already before using the notation to create your music.
All right, great, thank you. We have 3 more questions so far, and the next one is, when you talked about composing your own works, you mentioned that you don't always have a concrete plan in place, and you kind of work as you go along. So when do you feel like a piece is complete, or that you fully have arrived in the full essence of the piece?
Uh, you just hear it over and over again until you feel like this is it. I wish I could tell you a better kind of formula, but I don't believe there is. Every piece is kind of different, and you I think you can judge your piece whether it's finished or not by listening to it. Sometimes as I play through my piece on the piano, as like just like a reduction. Sometimes I record line by line into like a sequencer, and then sort of it doesn't need to be perfect. I just want to know like a objective playback of my music. The key is to see and listen to your music as a music lover, rather than, oh, I created this sort of, it's too much. When you are judging your music, sometimes you need to jump out of yourself to listen as a third person. And then all of a sudden, a lot of things are very clear. Obviously, the piece ended too soon. Or obviously, that climax was not long enough. And if I'm writing a piece, if I'm in the process of writing a piece, the first thing I do every morning is to get up and do nothing, and then go to the studio first thing, and because I just want that first listening, first fresh ear, that sense, and just to play back my work from the previous day. And immediately I just know from that first listening, oh, this didn't work, that was too long, I need 2 more measures here, this didn't sound good, and I write it on a notepad. And the rest of the day is basically to fix those things, and I kind of also know where the piece is gonna go. So keep a fresh, ear, and when you listen to your own work, uh, jump out of yourself as a general music audience. Actually, that's often more critical if you listen to your own work that way.
Mm-hmm. Great. The third question is there a central source of inspiration when you are composing your own music, or is there something that you do in your own downtime that allows you to really open up your creative mind?
I don't know if there's a central constant. I think there are maybe 3 things that's pretty central, that if I summarize all of my works, these things probably are there. Number 1 is probably my upbringing, as in this kind of really exciting period in the 80s. First, as a young kid in China, kind of get this first wave of westernized culture in China, and at the same time, experiencing the traditional Chinese culture. So that kind of mixture, that kind of mosaic of culture. Number 2 would be my experience here since for the last 20 years, really. That's my teachers, that's the people I work with, the musicians that I met. They constantly give me inspirations. I can't tell you how inspiring, at least for me, and I believe for a lot of composers, if you just hear a great performance, especially if someone play music really close to you, like physically close to you. Like, for example, I remember every time when I was at Curtis or Juilliard or USC, all of schools, every time you have like orchestration class and you have one of the classmates get up there, and the teacher, I remember the orchestration teacher would say, okay, just play a passage that's not just for us, but the stuff that you are practicing right now. It could be a Strauss symphony, like a little excerpts, or some kind of harp piece they were playing. Every time they do that, I thought I want to write a piece for that instrument. So a lot of times I feel like for me personally, inspiration came from the musicians. I hear them play, I want to write for them. And then there's just something magical about that, physically close to them, and you see them, playing right there. Um, so that's another thing. I mean, the third thing would be just everything culturally that I'm interested with. I'm interested in photography. I like movies. I like films. Um, so you can, in my category, there are quite few pieces from visual arts. Petals Fire from Cy Twombly's work, Morning After the Deluge from Turner's painting, Palace of Night Perfection was a Chinese painting. So a lot of visual arts references in my work as well.
Awesome, thank you. Another question is, of the composers you listed, like Higdon, Rousseau, Harkty, are there specific aspects of their music that you have taken into your own style, or are there, and then even second question would be, are there specific aspects of your own style that you now pass on to your students?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's a little bit hard to pin down, but I think in terms of this, the concept, like I said, this American symphonists, way of writing, which means, generally quite straightforward music writing. You use a symphonist doesn't mean you only write for orchestra. You sort of treat everything as sort of, traditional symphonic kind of fashion. And then for Rouse, I think I learned from him the most was this boldness in music. I mean, before starting with him, my music tends to be quite small in terms of length, in terms of scale. I tend to be, very sensitive to the musician's feelings, and but after studying with Rouse, he really opened my eyes to be more brave, just to go bold, just to make a mark. And I think that was really influential. I can see that in my music. And all of those things and all of the cultural references that I talked about, I passed on to my students today.
Okay, great. And then the last question that I have, oh, there's a few more coming in. But one other question is, in regards to like appropriation, how do you respectfully go about adopting other cultures into your own music?
Well, that's a great question. I think at the end of the day, my approach is the music must stand alone. So my goal is, at least for me, I mean, a kind of a requirement for myself, demand for myself is, I don't want my music to be appreciated only because of the title or because a backstory. I want my music to be in a baseline, satisfied, at least to myself, musically by sound only, without any title or backstory or inspiration. And then I think the cultural references only becomes an enhancement. It can only make the music better. So that's my approach to it. Otherwise, I think it depends on too much on the culture, on the non-musical stuff. So I want to make music as important as possible. So sometimes, for example, I have piece without titles, basically just absolute music. My violin concerto, my concerto for orchestra, the big piece I'm writing now for the wind ensemble called Sinfonia. It doesn't have a title. It has subtitles, but overall it's just called Sinfonia.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions from the students?
Well, that's okay. We're good. Thank you, Dan.
Oh, actually, we do have one student that just popped on. Aaron Butler, would you be willing to ask your question?
Yeah, sorry. I wasn't ready with my headphones. This is maybe since we're wrapping up too big of a topic to delve into, but I'm curious about the comments about needing to hear sounds first. And I think about this a lot in my own work. And I think this is often used in a like pejorative way towards a certain maybe aesthetic of composers. And it's, I wonder, like with where, like for instance, the story with the Morse code rhythm is an example of you not hearing that sound first necessarily, and then hoping that it works out musically satisfyingly. And so I don't see maybe logically the difference between like quote unquote like pushing notes around on a screen and then hoping that you find something, and it seems more about what you do after you find those notes.
Right. It's a great question. When I was saying about hearing a song first, that's more like in the actual composition process that you, because a lot of times if you don't have a inner hearing, or if you don't try out stuff that you what to see if you like or not, it's just unlimited possibilities. I mean, to be able to find through those possibility to anything that you like could be, it's just too much time, it's too much work to actually find it. It's just basically we're talking about randomly picking notes to see if this works, if that works. And I think at some point a composer should take control of, kind of knows what he or she wants for the music, to at least have a parameter of musical ideas. The Morse code idea, for example, if the Morse code, the rhythm was really not suitable for music, then I wouldn't have used it. It was only when if I give this sort of rhythm, if I give a class of students, let's say, okay, I'm gonna give you this rhythm as a motif for your next piece, and it goes pop 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 as a like a looped thing, and that's an idea narrowed down, and then finding what notes, it's it depends on your personality and your taste, but that narrows down to the rhythm. So, but still, when you're writing it, I still would actually have notes kind of ready before I put it into the computer. So I wouldn't just put that Morse code rhythm into the computer and just random click notes and play back until I find a sequence I like. I would still, on the piano, already get the chords or the pitches that I want, and sort of pre-listen to the piece already before notate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, Joe, this has just been great. I just have to say, I'm not given to these things, but this has been my favorite interview of all of them. And we've probably had 15 composers, and
Thank you.
Just been terrific. What an insight into how you think and your creative process, and just spectacular.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I was wondering, I'm going to dismiss the group, and do you mind staying on with me just for a little bit to talk about a couple things?
Sure, not at all.
Great. All right, so everybody, thank you for coming. Thanks for listening and for your questions. This will be archived with everything else. And I will see you Thursday, which is our last time together. Please tell your friends to come Thursday, and be prepared to stay for a while. because we'll have Paul Dooley in the front and then Alex Shapiro in the back. Alex has helped guide us with this online composition thing for your information, Joe. And so it'll be her last time to see you all. But let's do what we do for Zhou Tian. Everybody turn on your mics, and we always applaud even though it doesn't work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. If you guys would head out, it'd be awesome. I'd like to be on with him alone, if that's okay. So while they're leaving, let me just ask, so tell me about the piece you're writing for Wind Ensemble.
Yeah, I think Kevin put together this consortium of, I think it's a 14 or 15 school consortium for a 20-minute wind ensemble piece.
Cool.
It was actually, I mean, one of the purpose of the piece was because this year was MSU band's 150th anniversary.
Right.
It was actually supposed to premiere on April 25th.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And of course, coronavirus and all that, it got postponed, probably fall, but we don't know for sure.
Right.
So that's the piece I'm writing, and I'm very, very excited about it. Well, because it didn't get premiere in time, so I'm still kind of tweaking and doing some orchestration stuff.
Sure. Have you done much chamber work with winds at all?
Yeah, I have a brass quintet. I don't have a woodwind quintet. I have quite a few like flute pieces, but they're always involved with strings.
Right.
In fact, one of my most played works is called Viaje, in Spanish for journey or voyage. It's for flute, cello, and piano, and originally the version is for flute and string quartet.
Right.
So yeah, that's.
What is your backlog right now in terms of commissioning projects? Do you have a lot in the works?
Yeah, basically till 2022.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I'm grateful. I'm very grateful, and it's a good problem to have that I owe a lot of people a lot of music.
Sure. I was just wondering. So, is it too late to get in on the consortium with the Sinfonia?
I don't know, because it hasn't been premiered yet. Kevin has been handling all that. It became a CBDNA consortium. Perhaps. Do you know Kevin? I assume
Yes,
you do.
I do. Yeah, I'll just ask him straight up, and that's no problem. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think actually. Let me think. Are there any school in the West Coast? I can't have the whole list right. There's some school in Texas, but not.
Yeah, I'll just write to him. No big deal.
Probably, yeah. If he join, if the CBDNA thing is still open, I think it will be great. Yeah, well,
I put a lot together in my career and have been a part of tons of them, 30, 35, I don't know. And somehow or other, I missed that. I don't know how I missed it, but I've been fighting cancer for a couple years and a half, and it's very possible. No, I'm clean. Everything's good. I have a test next week, so I always get a little apprehensive when the tests roll up. But anyway, so I'll just write to him straight up and see if it's possible to get on. Is it like a fully instrumented wind ensemble kind of thing?
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, it's nothing too crazy. It's basically pedals fire kind of instrumentation. It will have 4 movements, 20 minutes total time, and I mean, Michigan is in it, State is in it, Jared, Austin is in it, Texas Austin is in it.
Junkin,
yeah. Some other schools.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if they're still open, I would be great. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure he'd want the money. So I'll just write to him straight up.
Great.
So yeah, I've done a lot of that. We have a guy here who's very good, Huck Hodge, young composer on our faculty.
Okay.
Um, Rome Prize. He just won the Charles Ives Living Award.
Oh,
He
great.
won the, what's the one in Europe? The Gaudeamus Prize. He won that. He's really talented, American Academy, blah, blah, blah. And he's done some things, and one of those consortiums got huge, 33 schools. The other one I think was 27. Anyhow, so you should know him. You would like him. You guys would get along famously. He's a good friend and really, really bright. Went to Columbia. He's a little more new music-y than you,
Okay.
I would say. But
Well, that's all good.
yeah, it's all good. Well, I just, I just feel like I just want to say, having been to China so much and working with bands there of all levels and the conservatories and everywhere, I just think that you're doing the best job by far of integrating the two cultures.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
And I just hope you feel this way. Right now, that's really important.
I know.
It's an important work. Because
Thank
China, in my last few visits, it's concerning what's happening there. It's very concerning, and I know you know.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very important time to use music to bridge those cultures. It's very important.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for that.
Thank you very much.
We have a similar passion that way. I can tell. So, all right, man. Well, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. This has just been so good, and I will look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes, absolutely. Same here. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Bye.